Hi everyone. I was flying from Melbourne to Nairobi last year through Dubai, and I had what I thought was a generous 3-hour layover. Plenty of time, shower, cup of tea, stretch the legs. Except the Melbourne flight left late. We landed just as my next flight was boarding, and if you've ever run through Dubai airport, you'll know it's not a terminal, it's a postcode. And I don't run. The app told me the gate, the screens told me the terminal, but none of them told me what mattered. How far, which direction, how long it would actually take. World-class technology, zero behavioural guidance. What saved me wasn't the system. It was the one human who saw the panic and gave me clear, specific directions. And here's the thing. I didn't suddenly become someone who runs. I moved because I knew exactly what to do. The airport had invested billions in systems, but the thing that moved me forward was behavioural clarity. And that's where organisations are right now with AI. The technology is extraordinary. The ambition is enormous. But the human system, the incentives, the reinforcement, the recognition hasn't caught up. Technology triggers transformation. People determine outcomes. You can't expect people to run towards change just because the platform exists. They move when the direction is clear, when the signals are consistent, when the behaviour is reinforced. Recognition isn't a feel-good layer, it's infrastructure, the behavioural clarity that makes change stick. Welcome to A-Listed. Welcome to A-Listed, the podcast where we investigate appreciation at work. Every episode, we look at what the science says about why appreciation matters and how leaders are putting it into practice to inspire action, align culture, and shape behaviours that drive performance and change. I'm Emma Harvie, and I lead research and insights at the Achievers Workforce Institute, where we have spent the last 20 years studying what motivates people to do the best work of their lives. And with us today is a leader who has helped organisations navigate transformation, culture shifts, and leadership reinvention. Managing Director for Achievers in APAC, Riges Younan. Regis, welcome to A-Listed.
Hey Em, I'm so happy to be here. I've been observing with tremendous interest the first couple of episodes, so thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Amazing, let's get into it. You've spent more than 20 years in enterprise SaaS, often in companies that are creating or reshaping categories. What was it about Achievers and the recognition category specifically that made you decide to join us?
Well, when you say more than 20 years, gee, tell you what, that goes pretty fast. I must admit I was very skeptical about the category when I first started having conversations with Bob Memmer, who's our Chief Revenue Officer. So I've known Bob for over a decade, and when we started talking about the prospect of me joining Achievers, I had an outside-in view of the category as being somewhat of a nice to have, a bit of kind of a thank you program. And so that to me was somewhat of a concern. And the reason that I was kind of skeptical was given the history that I've had with many organizations that were either creating new categories within HR technology, helping organizations, transform operating models. I really drew upon that experience and realized how difficult it was to support our customers in building the business case to get the funding required to get projects and initiatives off the ground. And so more recently, spending the last 6 or so years with a company called Gloat, where we created the category of the talent marketplace, pioneered enabling organizations to embark on this kind of skills-based transformation, and then for the last couple of years really enabled the AI transformation. Even the strategic and the critical nature of those topics, we found customers getting the relevant investment to do those things, somewhat difficult. So looking at that perspective and then coming to evaluate a category that, in a sense, seemed like a nice to have was one of the question marks that I had. But I then delved into incentive theory, and I started to look at behavioral science and all the data behind positive reinforcement and recognition specifically. And wow, did I change my perspective once I started to get into that detail. That research, in addition to meeting our SLT and a whole bunch of people within Achievers and really hearing the lived experience inside the organisation and some of the impact that we're making with our customers, really sold me in the end.
Good. I'm glad it did. But also not an uncommon perception to have of recognition and reward in the early days. I think that's very common amongst a lot of the people that we meet in the industry. But you've been here for 3 months now, and you obviously had this hypothesis about the R&R category. What surprised you most since you've actually been embedded in it, I would say, for the last 3 months or so?
The original reservations that I had about the category, have been clearly unfounded. Really, I've delved into the detail around the category specifically. But what was the big question that I was trying to answer, and really the main reason that I ended up taking leave to joining the company was I talked a little bit about my experience with companies that were really transforming categories. They were introducing the concept of candidate relationship management to talent acquisition in the context of a company called Avature, whether it was with Workday, where we were bringing both finance and HR to the cloud, and then more recently with Gloat. One of the biggest constraints in landing successful transformations was people. And how do you actually get people to do the things that you want them to do in order to ultimately drive a successful transformation and land the change? And that was always the biggest constraint. And when I came across Achievers and I looked at so many of the stories that we have of leveraging recognition and programmatic and targeted rewards to drive leading indicator behavior change in order to ultimately link that to a business outcome, to me, I saw the opportunity as being a huge one, and the impact that we could make being, really, really significant. So that's been the realization now 3 months into the role. And I must admit, we're starting to see that sort of manifest itself in the types of discussions that we're having with customers, and also the results customers are getting by, really partnering with us on this journey.
Yeah, it really aligns with what we find at Achievers Workforce Institute. 92% of employees say they're unclear on what is expected of them at work. And when organisations are trying to navigate all of these transformations and change behaviour and, amongst all the uncertainty that's happening in the world around us, actually align employees to a common mission and purpose, the work we're doing in that space is more important than ever. But thinking about personal experience, we obviously talk a lot about recognition. Experiencing it, though, for yourself is different to talking about it. What has been your personal experience with recognition at Achievers, and how has that felt coming into a new organisation, a new role, and we're going through our own transformation as well? How has recognition played a role in your experience so far?
That's a really great question, because I hadn't really experienced it to the extent that I have here at Achievers previously. And that was probably one of the things that I think I personally felt was missing, was as a leader coming in, whether it's growing new businesses in new regions or building new functions globally, you have a thesis, you establish a plan, you try and communicate that plan with clarity, and you have metrics that you track in order to establish progress. That's the kind of the science, I think, behind the execution, but also being told that, hey, you are doing the right things and being recognized for the progress that you are making in times of significant change, and also in times of transformation, really makes a difference. And I recall, just recently, my manager, Bob, who I mentioned earlier, giving me that recognition that, hey, yes, there's a lot of work that we need to do, but you're on the right track, and these are the things that we see that are evidence of you doing the right thing. So that makes a tremendous amount of difference. And as you say, we're all human, and we all have vulnerabilities and insecurities, and with that you want to ensure that you are progressing in the right direction. I deeply care about our purpose, our mission, and our people here, and want to make sure that we ultimately are progressing towards our goals. So it's made a huge difference. There are some other examples that I'm sure I'll talk about as we go along, of how it's been fully integrated into ways of working and become so natural to be able to give recognition, and the impact that not only receiving but also giving recognition has on performance and culture.
That's it. It's got to be easy, doesn't it? We've got so many systems to log into at work, and if we have to log into another one, you're being asked to do more and more things. I think that just makes things harder and becomes that barrier to recognition. You mentioned it just briefly about vulnerability, and you and I have had many a conversation about imposter syndrome and how we feel about being in the roles that we're in, and that pressure of stepping into a new leadership role. How does recognition play into that, particularly when it's public and it's coming from peers or from leaders?
Everyone wants to be aware of are the things that we are doing day to day ultimately stacking up to making progress aligned to the work that we're responsible for, that ultimately ladders up to the company's mission or purpose. And so I think when you look at high performing teams, whether that's in the enterprise or whether that's in sport, there is that really beautiful alignment that comes from having deep connection for the work that you're doing, and that the work that you're doing actually matters and is having impact, and you can see, and also someone can see that's happening. And so I think it's that reinforcement and recognition of the work that you're doing, I believe is critical, and I think forms the fabric or the DNA of a connected organisation.
Yeah, it plays such a big role in making sure you get out of your own head, doesn't it? Around, does the work that I do matter? Am I on the right track? Am I focused on the right things? Because I think there's no question about effort or commitment or the time that we're putting into the work that we do, but we need to make sure that it does matter and that we're all moving in the right direction rather than just putting in time and effort, right?
Yeah, and look, I think that it is one of the few organisations that I've been involved with that I can genuinely say there is tremendous alignment, all the way from the CEO and the SLT through to the functions in the region. Like everyone is aware of kind of the work that they're doing and how that ladders up to ultimately our priorities, and that's rare. Like that's not something that happens easily, particularly in a organisation that you have to sort of align cross-functionally and so on. It's, it has its challenges. So that really makes a difference.
It's really great to hear, as someone who's been here for 10 years. It's easy to become complacent about what is special about Achievers versus what is going on in other organisations, because it's been a long time since I've experienced that personally. Right. Yeah. But if we zoom out across your career, you've consistently joined organisations that are introducing new operating models or major shifts, things like talent marketplaces, new categories, AI-driven transformation. What have you learned about what determines whether a transformation lands or stalls?
In my experience, the most successful companies that have landed significant transformational shifts or moves have realised that it's much more of a people problem than it is a technology problem. And I think if you put yourself in the shoes of the CTO, the CIO, the Chief AI Officer that are tasked to lead and navigate organisations through this significant platform shift, they realised that technology is one element, but the people element and the behavioural element is probably more important than the technology itself, because we have so much going on. So imagine a world where, I'm trying to get things done. I've got access to all of these tools. I am concerned about, do I have the skills and the capability to continue to be productive? And I'm having to learn a whole bunch of new stuff, and it's coming at me so fast. Like, what kind of support am I getting from my leader, the organization, in order to understand where to focus my time? I think that's a really big challenge. So one of my good friends and consultants, Gareth Flynn from TQ Solutions, I think he came up with a metric that for every dollar spent on technology, you should spend 5x on the people change aspect of that in order to land a successful transformation.
Yeah, the billions being spent on just on AI transformation alone, and the lack of ROI that organisations are finding is critical. And without human behaviour, none of that is going to change. You mentioned that some of the behaviours we need to see. We need to tell people what's important to focus on, how to spend my time. I need to upskill. There's also things like building confidence. Psychological safety is such a critical part of AI transformation. So I need to feel like I'm safe to experiment, that I am encouraged to be curious or to redesign workflows. Why do you think those behaviours are so critical when organisations are trying to adopt AI?
I mean, the reality is we don't have the answers, right? And there's no codified playbook on kind of exactly what you need to do in order for this to be successful. The rate of change is so fast. You talked about my 20 plus years in enterprise SaaS. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I haven't seen change as rapid as what we're seeing today. The speed at which the frontier labs are releasing new models, the technologies that are being built as a result of the evolution of these models. I'm kind of geeking out on OpenClaw at the moment and really kind of getting into the different applications of that technology and trying to understand kind of what does that mean for work, what does that mean for the workforce when you have fully autonomous agents that are able to execute tasks that typically humans would do. So there's a whole thing, I'm sure we could definitely spend an hour on that whole topic. So creating a environment, as you mentioned, creating a culture where it's okay to fail and is in fact encouraged to experiment and try new things, whether that is leveraging new tools and capability to redesign the work that you're doing and how you do that work, whether that is looking more critically at the workflow or the process that you're focused on and how do you embed technology and AI in this case to augment the work that you're doing. Like, all of these things are ways to kind of progressively move organizations and become much more AI native in this era. But if you don't create the culture and the environment to make people safe and not fear losing their jobs because of the impact of these technologies, and actually encourage them to try new things, to experiment with new tools, give them access to the tooling, the capability to pilot some new ways of working, you're never going to really drive the value from the investments that you're making. So I think that as you rightly point out, creating the environment to exhibit all of those key behaviors that ultimately link to the outcomes that you're trying to drive is a critical factor to being successful here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most fascinating things about recognition data is that it acts as a real-time signal. It shows what behaviors are actually happening across the organization. How can leaders use those signals to understand whether their transformation is moving in the right direction?
Well, you know I'm a data junkie, right? We've spent a lot of time. We've spent a lot of time here, and you know, like the value of high frequency recognition and the impact of that across the employee lifecycle is significant. And so if you think about, like, it shows up in so many different touch points of whether it's people coming into the organization in an onboarding context. So, you know, one of our retail customers has seen a significant reduction in risk for frontline staff in that first 12-month period, which, as you know, there's a lot of attrition in that cohort of the impact of high frequency recognition, whether that's 0 to 30 days, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, has impact on the risk of regrettable attrition during that really key period of time. How do you then leverage this data in the context of a manager that has such a tough job in trying to navigate what the workforce is going to look like, trying to navigate 5+ generations of workers in the enterprise or workers in the workforce, trying to figure out, like, how do you do that job successfully is a really significant challenge. And what our point of view here is, like, how do you then use the intelligence, the data, the people intelligence, and surface that up to leaders and managers so that they are really supporting their people as they're kind of navigating through all of this change and uncertainty.
Yeah, I think that the data and a recognition program is probably the most undervalued asset when it comes to a recognition and reward program. You've got all those insights that you mentioned. And when you're navigating transformation, if you look at AI transformation specifically, there's no other source of data that tells you in real time how it's landing. So you do engagement surveys, you might do them annually, biannually, quarterly, but they're always delayed and looking back in the past. When you do your performance cycle, again, doesn't matter how often you're doing that, whether it's biannual or annual, it's looking back and it's delayed. It might be 6 months between changing something and then measuring performance down the track. Recognition actually gives you that daily, weekly, monthly insight into what's going on. Are people experimenting? Are people being curious? Are they sharing? Are they learning? Are they delivering outcomes? Are they changing workflows? It's real time. And I think that's just an amazing untapped resource that HR leaders have when they have a high recognition frequency program that is being used across the whole business. It's an untapped resource.
You touched on something earlier. You asked the question around why is it so important to get those signals as an employee entering a new organisation, or maybe a new leader inside the organisation. When I think about this in the context of leaders wanting a signal that they are doing the right thing, and historically we've really relied upon ENPS as kind of like the metric that we would look at. Is that moving? What's going on in the pulse survey? Etc. Now, that is one kind of piece of insight, but as you rightly touched on, imagine a world where you have access to all of this insight around recognition and what people are getting recognized for, and how those recognitions actually ladder up to the values that you have inside the organization that ultimately link to the culture that you're trying to drive. As a CEO, I would imagine that is a critical piece of insight in order for you to kind of determine, are you executing on the strategy or not?
Yeah, and almost just as importantly is where the recognition is missing is just as big a signal, right? Is if people are not recognizing each other for the behaviors that you want to see, then that's a signal that culture needs to change in that team or that area of business, just the same as if you're also seeing really high activity in those areas. You're speaking with leaders across Asia Pacific every day about culture, performance, and change. Are there any themes that you're hearing right now that make this kind of conversation especially urgent for leaders across APAC?
Culture and performance is a discussion that we're having regularly. I must admit, I didn't realise to the extent that I do today, and even in this short period of time, how important aligning the organisation's value system drives kind of the culture of the organisation that is a leading indicator to outsized performance. And we're engaging in that conversation very regularly. And so to me, I think looking at building high performance teams and the role that culture plays in that equation and the role that the values being exhibited ladder up to the culture, the impact that has and ultimately what role recognition plays as it relates to that. All of these things are really kind of intertwined and linked. And so we're engaging in those discussions, in really unpacking what are the strategic priorities. Inevitably, the kind of people and talent aspect ladders up to one of those strategic priorities. And then ultimately, if I am the CHRO or the CEO, it's how are we building the right culture, and how do we have visibility of the values being displayed inside our organization through recognition in many examples or lack thereof, and that's a problem that we're actively trying to solve with our customers, and then we are actively having those discussions with prospective organisations, particularly at the C-suite, to help enable their strategic priorities.
100%. I've just spent 3 days talking to different organisations about this exact thing, and around 50% of the organisations I met with are actually going through a values refresh or a values relaunch where they're reviewing their values. They may keep some the same, they might change the descriptions of those values, and they might introduce completely new values. I think that's really timely with the amount of transformation and the way technology is moving, is asking the question is, do the values of yesterday, are they still relevant in today, and are they the behaviours that I need to drive in order to take our organisation to where we're headed? It's a really interesting thought that is obviously top of mind for a lot of HR leaders at the moment. Now, you're going to bring a lot of these conversations to life at Recognition Next Australia, which is happening on the 23rd of April in Melbourne. For leaders who are thinking about joining us there, what can they expect from the evening, and why do you think it will be such a valuable room to be in?
We have a really exciting agenda, and one of those items of the agenda is a CEO discussion. So we have Scott Landers, our own CEO, flying to Australia to be a part of that session. We have Chris Wilesmith, who's the CEO of a company called Bapcor, in that session, talking about exactly this. How do you lead through change and transformation, and what does the role of culture and therefore recognition play in a transformation, in significant change? And so if you are a HR leader, you're a CHRO, and you are struggling to build the case or get mind share from your CEO or your executive peers, that is a conversation that I would suggest you'd want to listen into, just to get a sense of how CEOs that have driven large-scale transformations see the role of culture and see the role of recognition as it relates to cultural transformation that ultimately links to business transformation plays. So I think that's one part. The other thing I would say is your session with Gareth Flynn is going to be an awesome one, which is really, looking at AWI and the research that you're doing and the impact of that research on just broader sort of change and transformation. So Gareth Flynn from TQ Solutions will be also giving a point of view on what he's seeing across the globe. So he's doing a lot of work with large organizations that are embarking on this AI transformation, and we'll talk a lot about the pillars associated with embarking on an AI transformation, and get into detail around work analysis and task intelligence. We'll talk about work design as well. We'll also talk about skills and how they relate to people as they embark on this transformation. So I think there's a whole range there. You'll hear about the investments that we're making from a product standpoint, and the roadmap, the vision, and how we support like our view of the world and why we're making these investments. So we're super excited to be hosting this. 3 months in, we're there's a lot of buzz going on, as you know, here in the region, just getting everyone registered and so on. So it's going to be an exciting event, and you'll meet a whole bunch of peers to exchange ideas that are kind of leaning into this topic. So we'd love for everyone to register and see you there.
Yeah, can't wait. We're hosting Recognition Next Australia at a time when so many APAC leaders are trying to strengthen connection, performance and culture all at once. What makes this event a valuable opportunity for HR leaders and business executives to step back, to learn and have the right conversation together?
The role of the HR executive or the CHRO and the relationship that role has as a partner to the rest of the C-suite has always been one kind of debate. And, you've heard a lot about this concept of seat at the table, et cetera, et cetera. What I would suggest is that there are a number of things that the CHRO is doing and as it relates to their priorities. But being a good partner to your CIO, your CTO, your Chief AI Officer in the AI era will be critical to the role that this function plays in the evolution of work and the workforce. And I would say that there's no more critical time for the CHRO to be thinking about how they can be a strategic partner in the AI transformation that organizations are going through, and the role that people and behavior and change and the recognition of the efforts to make that change play on a successful transformation. For me at my core, although I'm super geeky with all the AI tools, as you know, and I'm heavily invested in that in terms of my career, but also personally the way that's integrated into my workflow. At my core, I'm a humanist, right? So for me, it's about how does AI serve us as humans, and what role do we want AI to play in our lives in the future? And we are at such an important time. Some of the decisions that we make, I think over the next couple of years are going to impact our species. And that's really kind of the extent of it. And so we have an opportunity, and I think a responsibility to invest in understanding why our role is so critical today, and how do we support our organizations to make the right decisions so that our people actually flourish in this new world, and that they come to work, they have a purpose, and they're enabled, they have the skills to navigate this change, to provide for their families. All of those things absolutely matter and are critical. And I think it's incumbent upon us, right, as leaders, to educate ourselves on the role that we play. And I think that this event is one example of how you can kind of open up your eyes to what is actually going on out there, and what is your role inside your organization, and hopefully help us step up to that and play a critical role there.
Yeah, as you said, it's never been more critical than it is today. Regis, thank you. This conversation reinforces something really actually quite simple. Technology triggers change, but behaviour determines outcomes. And if the reinforcement system doesn't evolve alongside technology, then transformation stalls. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
Welcome back to A-Listed, the show where we talk about the science and the stories of appreciation at work. And Emma, I was disappointed to have missed your conversation with Regis, but I did have an opportunity to watch it back. And I think one of the interesting things that he said during your conversation is that really the best companies have landed significant transformational shifts. These companies have realized that it's much more of a people problem or opportunity than it is a technology problem or opportunity. Did you get that too?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a gap that exists between the technology that's being implemented to transform organizations and the ROI that they're getting. And the gap is the people, the human behavior that comes into that. I was at a responsible AI leadership summit recently, and they talked about the human capability gap that's actually being designed around and not into. Is this idea that we're seeing AI roles being created, being advertised. The AI uplift roles are everywhere. I even saw one of the consulting firms came out recently and said that everybody must have AI skills in order to work at that organization. So that's very obvious. There are no human capability uplift roles being spoken about, being advertised, being created. I think things like critical thinking, communication, judgment, these are going to be needed more than ever. We're going to be in a world where we're managing agents and we're managing people. And if we don't have critical thinking and judgment as skills, we're going to have a massive problem. And we need to be able to influence that human capability piece at scale.
That's really interesting. I think the pendulum swing on soft skills has been slow, but it has finally arrived at the right place, which is that soft skills are not soft. They are critical for this next generation of what work looks like.
Absolutely. And we researched, obviously, Recognition Achievers Workforce Institute. What do you find is the key to developing those skills?
Yeah, I think that frequent and meaningful recognition for the impact someone is having in their role. And again, in a recent conversation, Arthur from Veritiv talked about the importance of meaning and recognition, that we want to move away from the attaboys and the pats on the back. But I think there's true utility and uplift when we are personal, specific, and impact-oriented for not just the big heroic things, but often the little things that people did on their way to something really, really big. And so I do think that recognition, again, has a huge role to play in shaping the workforce of the future.
Absolutely. This has been another episode of A-Listed, the podcast where we explore the stories and the science behind appreciation at work. Thank you for joining us. You can subscribe to A-Listed wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts.